I'm Jolene, the conference reporter, here with Neal Mirsky, who I just met, and I thought, wow, he's pretty interesting. He has a couple years behind him.
In other words, I'm old.
So this is Neal Mirsky, and you've been in the radio business and music industry?
For about 35 years, starting as a disc jockey and then moving up the ladder, becoming a program director of a radio station, which is basically the guy who hires and fires the disc jockeys, picks the music, oversees marketing and promotion, basically responsible for everything that comes out of the speakers 24/7.
And before we get back to that, I'm remembering, so what did you do with MTV?
I took a chance. I had actually been programming a rock station here in Miami in the early 80s, and I left that job and wasn't sure what I was going to do next. I'd moved around Florida and worked my way from Sarasota to Orlando, then Miami, and there was no place else to go in Florida, and it would have meant having to leave. And then I got offered an opportunity to interview for a job with this brand new entity, this music video channel called MTV in New York. And I don't know why they hired me. I know they interviewed about 300 people, and they flew me up a couple of times and kept bringing me up the food chain. But I got hired as the coordinating producer, which meant basically I ran the studio. I was in charge of the 5 VJs, the recording of all of the VJ segments that went between the videos. And for those youngsters who didn't know, MTV used to show videos. Remember that? Before Teen Mom? And all of the artist interviews, celebrity interviews, and worked there the first 2 years of the channel. It was a pretty exciting place to be.
What was the, that was pretty cool for it to be, you're from radio, but now you have visual. So what was some cool aspects that kind of surprised you, like, oh, this is more dynamic than radio?
Well, it's funny because when MTV, I wasn't there when it launched. I joined a few months after the launch. When MTV first launched, I was running a rock station in Miami, and like most people in radio, was saying things like, this will never catch on. How many times can you watch the same video? What happened at MTV was, as radio was getting tighter and tighter with their playlists, MTV started playing these videos. Bands like Duran Duran and Adam Ant had already been out to radio a year or two, and radio ignored them. And MTV, with these creative visuals, and Duran Duran was one of the most visually creative bands, their early videos, that just made these bands, all of a sudden they were rock stars, and radio had nothing to do with it. They jumped on the bandwagon after, even though they'd had that opportunity. But as far as my job went, it was just like radio with pictures. My job was mostly involved with the VJs segments, them talking to the audience, relating, interviewing, working with that kind of stuff.
Very cool, because I do remember MTV. That was really fun. So let's go back to radio. So how has radio changed in the last 35 years?
Well, I should say I worked almost exclusively in rock radio, as opposed to country or easy listening or top 40.
Or Soul Train music.
Well, but that's the interesting point. At the beginning of my career in the early 70s, FM, what they called AOR radio, which was album-oriented rock, where we played tracks from an album. If a new Rolling Stones album came out, if there were 6 great songs on an album, we played all of them. And also, there were no formatic boundaries. You could go from Led Zeppelin to Joan Baez to the Rolling Stones to Santana to, folk music, jazz fusion. I mean, it ran the gamut. There were no, even throw comedy in there. There were no formatic boundaries. There were also no corporate generated playlists where I would go on the air to do a morning show in the early 70s. I'd have 2 turntables, a wall of maybe 10,000 record albums. Remember those? And 4 hours to fill, and we would paint with music, we would tell stories, we would have theme sets, and communicate with the listeners entertain them and educate them at the same time. And there was a bond between the listener and the disc jockey, between the listener, the audience, and the radio station itself. That's gone. Basically, in the late...
Hold on a second. I'm just thinking of WKRP right now. That was so cool.
Yeah, and I've worked with some sales managers who are a lot like Herb Tarlack from WKRP. And basically, it just all became about the money. I mean, it was always about money. It was a business. I like being paid and being able to buy stuff. But it just got to the point where all of a sudden it was all targeted demographics. Now you weren't trying to be, it used to be broadcasting, it became narrowcasting. Budweiser was one of the biggest advertisers on rock radio in America, and they wanted to target the 18 to 34-year-old male demographic. So then radio stations, in order to get the bulk of Budweiser's money, would do all of this research to determine what songs were most popular with 18 to 34-year-old males, so your ratings in that demographic would go up. And it kind of ruined radio. And all of a sudden, you had all of these niches. And then rock radio evolved into, it got niched to where there was soft rock, classic rock, progressive rock, alternative rock.
All because of the marketing.
All because of the marketing. It was just all about reaching, advertisers' demands, advertisers' specific needs, and targeting. Also, back then, before one company could own over 100 radio stations, there were limits. You couldn't own more than 2 AMs and 2 FMs in a market. Wow. And so your competition, the battle between 2 rock stations in a market, and I've been involved in many battles, it's what made us all better radio stations for our listeners. Now you've got 10 stations in one building, all owned by the same company, and your competition's across the hall, and they're really not your competition anymore. It's sort of like, all right, you target the 18 to 24-year-old men, I'll target the 25 to 34-year-old men, where it gets narrower and narrower. And I think it's become a utility. It's like you want electricity, you flip the light switch on. If you want water, you turn the faucet. If you want music, you turn on the radio. But it's just not the experience, in my mind, that used to be. And I rarely listen anymore. Like an NPR person.
Well, NPR, but I have the NPR One. It's on your phone, and it's really cool. It kind of memorizes. You can train it to what you listen to. So, again, on my phone, I don't listen to traditional radio. But what do you think of, some of the Pandora and Spotify and those types of...
Well, the first challenge that came to radio was satellite. Where suddenly Sirius XM, was the new, and people didn't think it would catch on, and it did. And then with Pandora and Spotify, I've got both of them on my computer. I don't listen that often. Most of my issues with Pandora and Spotify are more about the artists not being compensated for their music. When I grew up, of course, albums back then cost maybe $5.98, $6.98, and if I was going to spend my allowance money to be able to buy an album or two that week, I really thought long and hard about what I was going to buy. It had value, and then I would take it home and I would I would read the liner note. I would fondle my vinyl. I'd read the liner notes. Who produced it? Who wrote what songs? And really, it was important to me. Now, granted, I'm not the average person, but now it seemed music, through Napster and everything that came after Napster, music's kind of free. And I think that kind of sucks, especially for the artists. The artists are not getting, as CD sales have gone down, and now even the revenue that they get, they're getting ripped off. And the only way artists can make money anymore is they don't make money off their records, but their records give them the ability and an excuse to tour. And they make their money off touring. And most of the money they make off touring is really off their merchandise, selling their T-shirts and their caps and their hoodies. So the business has really changed a lot. And I don't like seeing these musicians who I revere, who've made this incredible music that's really moved me, getting ripped off. It just, when something is free, it loses its value. And that's sad to me.
Well, from just going on the Soul Train cruise several weeks ago, the musicians, I hear what you're saying, but man, whether they're working or paid or not, I mean, they're loving their craft and they're loving their fans. And you can see, like Smokey Robinson, I was maybe mentioning, I didn't give you a demo, or did I? You could just feel like how great he was into his music and how he shared that with the world. And so, yes, unfortunate, but also they have their enjoyment from their craft. So there's something.
Oh,
But,
well,
yeah.
I mean, somebody like Smokey, who has been around, and I love Smokey Robinson and all of his music, but he's been around a long time,
Yeah.
and he's got so many songs that generate so much revenue through the publishing of those songs that he's comfortable.
Oh, okay.
But it's a lot of these new young artists that just they can't really they make great music and they can't make a living off of it because people have gotten used to not paying for music.
I maybe have found your next step. Your next action item, Neal. Well, you're talking, you're retired and you're happy as a clam right now. But, maybe there's just something you could help. You could, some artists you could help just somehow. I'm just saying.
Oh, I
Okay.
definitely have a lot of musician friends.
Okay.
I still manage a couple of bands
Okay.
and try and give them guidance and help them. I'm not doing it to get rich because it's awful hard to get rich doing that these days. That's not why I do it. Just people, if their music excites me and I can use my connections or my influence or my voice, even if it's just on my Facebook page where every day I publish a song of the day, if I can expose that to a couple of thousand people and try and help them in that way, I feel like I am helping.
Yes. Neal Mirsky, thank you.
My pleasure.